Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Pat and Jeff Show. I'm Pat, and I'm joined by Jeff, and it's going to be a special show today because we were going to do Heart is Not a Pump. Turns out that's a complicated topic, so we wanted to get a little more time. Jeff, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great, Patrick. Doing all good here.
Yep. So normally we would be talking right now, but what I did in this interview with Tom Luongo was, and those of you who don't know who Tom Luongo is, you're about to know because we're about to cut to that interview. In the interview, we talked about, the red pill, and we talked about Trump, and we talked about the Federal Reserve and how dollars are priced, the euro dollar system, pretty darn complex stuff. And it was really good to get Tom on the show. But Jeff, it's so central to this war, the financial system. It's really important that we start getting our minds around it, don't you think?
Oh, for sure, because we know the financial system is the basis of everything, right? That's how they controlled everything.
Absolutely, yeah. And we want arrests, but none of it matters if the financial system persists. And the people who control that thing, I don't think we know their names. And I don't think many of them give a shit if Hillary Clinton is arrested or not. So I think it's pretty important. So I just wanted to tell everybody the Pat and Jeff Show will be back to its normal format this upcoming Saturday, where we will be talking about how the heart, that's right, it's not a pump. So you're going to want to tune in for that. But right now, please enjoy my interview with the very brilliant, the very iconoclastic Tom Luongo. And Jeff, I'll see you next week.
Sounds great, Patrick. Thank you.
Hello, my dear friends. Welcome back to the Patrick Gunnels Rumble channel. And I'm so excited today to have the brilliant Tom Luongo of tomluongo.me, and from his, well, shall we say, obligatory bio, this is Tom Luongo, the owner of the Gold, Goats, and Guns newsletter. And Tom, your interviews, your Substack posts, and just your blogs in general, your work appears on Lou Rockwell, Zero Hedge, Bitcoin Magazine, and you have built quite the fiercely loyal audience by challenging conventional wisdom without falling into any easily definable camps. And one of the reasons I've kind of gotten addicted to watching some of your shows is because you really are attempting to figure out how the hell the world works. Mm-hmm. And you also know that there's a very good chance that you're going to be wrong. It's the people who are so damn certain that I become suspicious of immediately, because this world is confusing. And the more that I've lived, the more I realize I know so very little compared to what I don't know. So with that,
yeah, Patrick, that's a great way of putting it. It's like, a long time ago. So this is one of those things, right? So, also from the obligatory bios that, previous to becoming, a professional curmudgeon, I was a professional chemist and researcher, right? And so one of the things that, with the real world, and I mean the real world when it comes down to physics, chemistry, and all that stuff, is you will get your ass kicked more often than you will succeed. And you have to realize that failure is the path to, enlightenment about a lot of things. And so the goal is never to, be certain about anything. It's to create, Bayesian probability fields, for lack of a better term, and of what you think is going on out there. We're all working, especially geopolitically, with fungible information. There's nothing. I'm not, measuring temperatures here. I'm not measuring pressures. I'm not. And so because of that, deposition rates or whatever you're talking about, right? Like, so you put a hypothesis on the table, and then you hope that, that you can start to accumulate data that supports that hypothesis versus the counter hypothesis or the counter scenario, or even a different hypothesis, and kind of tease the overlapping Venn diagram areas of the Venn diagram and start to tease them out from one another, and then try to zero in where you think the common denominator is. That's really what we do, right? That's what I do. That's and it's it's not always right. It's not always, it's a process. And, one of the things I was talking with my friend of mine the other day, and we were on Tommy Kerrigan's podcast, and he made a really good point of that. We're taught from a media perspective, right? The media only cares about outcomes. Like they take an event and then extrapolate it directly to, oh, that's going to be this outcome is going to come. And it's like, that's not that at all. That's not the way the world works at all. The world is a process. We should be more focused on process than we should be focused on outcomes. Outcomes are the application of process, right? Jumping to point Z and saying this is going to be the outcome. I don't care what it is. Bitcoin's going to take over the world. The Jews run everything. It doesn't matter what it is. I mean, even my own all roads lead to London, right? None of those things are, none of those outcomes per se are set in stone. And so you got to watch the process to understand how you're going to get to a particular outcome.
Yeah.
And, one of the things before we started recording, one of the things you said was, I'm not really interested in picking apart things that you do say in order to try and, but as opposed to trying to figure out how you think in order to get to, the conclusions. And what I'll tell you is that that's a very interesting point, because I remember for a long time, I mean, I'm thinking back now, and the minute you said that, I started flashing back to like 14-year-old me. 14-year-old me was sitting around, at one point saying, I don't really think people change the way they think, right? I think your identity is as much tied up in how you, process information as anything else. Because I remember saying to myself about age 30 or 32, I'm like, or certainly after my first conversion to libertarianism, which I've now in some ways repudiated, I remember thinking back to the 14-year-old me going, I still feel like I'm 14.
Yeah.
I still think exactly the way I did then. The only difference is now that when I put when I approach the data, the mechanism by which I accumulate information is exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is I see it with a different set of eyes and therefore come to different conclusions based on the totality of the information that I've got. The process of how my brain operates has not changed. What has changed is how, over time, is how my brain decides to organize that information that's been accumulated and then draw conclusions from it. Focusing on process leads you to better outcomes, better prediction of outcomes than focusing on outcomes and then trying to backfill the process.
Before we get into specifics, what you just described actually, because when Donald Trump came down the escalator, I didn't pay much attention. I had given up on politics back in 2012 when Mitt Romney lost. It seemed impossible that Mitt Romney could lose to this, what I assumed to be unpopular, incompetent, communist Obama. So Nothing made sense. We're screwed. I'll just move on and try to cultivate my own garden. And then Trump came down the escalator. I didn't pay attention. The Access Hollywood tape came out, and I assumed Trump was toast. Somehow Trump won, and then the world changed enormously in big, fundamental glitch in the matrix kind of ways. And I started trying to understand the world in different ways because the media started acting absolutely crazy. And one of the first people I came across was Scott Adams, who said, and this was a really, and by the way, I really hope he does well with his health, and I'm praying for him every day. But he said, stop looking at goals, start looking at systems and start trying to make the systems work. And he said, start doing something every single day and try to get a little better at it. And then maybe see if you can get paid for it. And that's exactly what I did. And that's what that reminded me of.
Yeah, no, Scott Adams. I remember when Scott was talking about that stuff back then. I remember I did a very early video on, early on, and it was a very early post on the blog. I'm not writing for the blog anymore because I just don't have time. We mostly just publish the newsletter announcements, monthly newsletter announcements, and the Gold Ghost and Gun podcast episodes is really what it's a repository of. Maybe one of these days I'll get back to writing publicly, but right now it's like I have barely enough time to, do shows like this, actually, and then get all the work done I need to get done on a monthly basis, right? And take care of the patrons and take care of my other clients. So, but one of the things I said was, and I pinged Scott after this was the day that Scott Adams made me a better writer. And he just he was doing a little simple chalkboard thing about, and there was a couple of things that he just said about, he was doing that was the time when he was doing like the whiteboard or the chalkboard thing. It was hilarious. And I remember watching that going, oh yeah, no, that's good. That's good. I need to do that. That's good. These are things that I immediately noted deficits in my writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, okay, cool. Thank you, Scott. And then I pinged him and I said, with the post, and he actually, which was cool, he actually acknowledged it. I was 600 people on Twitter at that point in my life.
Oh,
right?
Wow.
But it was good. And so I give Scott a lot of credit for a lot of these things. He kind of went, his, during COVID, his norminess, got the better of him, which he's, again, apologized for. And again, another guy whose credibility goes up immensely the minute he turns around and goes, yeah, I was wrong about that.
Yeah.
COVID, and that's the kind of thing, but COVID drove everybody nuts, man.
Everybody went crazy. Yeah. It was the
most
real thing
who looked through. I looked at COVID and I gave it the benefit of the doubt for about the first 4 to 6 weeks. I was open to it through early March, mid-March or so. But it was the rumblings in January of that year. I was having, my wife and I would sit on the porch like, okay, maybe this is real. Maybe this is an operation. Maybe it's not what it is, what it's looking like. So let's treat it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And then Trump mentioned the word hydroxychloroquine. The world lost its mind. I'm like, it's an operation. I was doing weekly shows with Garland Nixon and Lee Stranahan on Sputnik Radio every Friday. And Lee and Garland had already both lost their minds. And I'm like, dudes, you're watching this. This is crazy. You're missing the very obvious thing here, and you should know better. But whatever happened. Everybody has their moments, right?
Yeah.
And I remember having to hang up on Lee, live on air, because he was starting to play the game of, I'm going to tear apart your words and take you down. I'm like, I don't come on anybody's show to be struggle sessions. I don't know who the hell you are.
Exactly.
Right? But that being said, I also learned a lot from Lee in the time that I worked, that we did shows together, and we chatted. It's like everything else. There are certain things that certain things you don't forgive in this life, and that's one of them. But at the same time, I can acknowledge that I learned a lot as well. So, once I saw COVID for what it was at that moment, and I started looking at the way they were bombing the financial markets, this is when I started to really level up as a political and as a market analyst, because it was at that moment that I watched the process of them trying to destroy not only Trump, but Powell and the American system of government.
Before you get on,
once I got there, that's where we got into by a year and a half. That's why I was able a year later, right, to get into SOFR versus LIBOR and all of the stuff that now quote unquote within the for very small values of the word famous for, right, this whole right, and that's where, but it started then because I could see the attack on the Fed for what it was. And and it was just percolating in the back of my head, even though I was still a kind of a doctrinaire Austro-libertarian. And similar to you, by 2012, I was completely checked out on politics. Donald Trump had to be, I had to be dragged bodily across the psychological finish line to finally vote for Trump. And I only made the decision to vote for him the Sunday before the election, because I had decided, I was, don't vote, why encourage them? Yeah. Right. And I don't vote because I don't like to encourage them. That was the standard. I ran couldn't even vote for Dopey Weed guy, the clear stalking horse for Hillary Clinton. Yeah,
just to give you a little bit of context, I ran for Congress on the Libertarian Party ticket here in Houston back in 2018 against Dan Crenshaw. Even though I voted for Trump in 2016, I only voted for Trump because my dad told me to. Just do it, okay? Just right. Because I wasn't planning on voting. And then so I voted for Trump just to make my dad happy. and Trump started doing some really interesting stuff. And the Russia hoax was so stupid that I realized that every single institution was simultaneously trying to destroy this man, and that mattered to me. And everybody who hated Trump was somebody I also hated, and that was a starting point for me.
Yes.
And so from there, but I went into it as an Ayn Rand loving, Atlas Shrugged, waving, anarcho-capitalist. I was in all the fancy clubs in college, and all of a sudden, and Steve Bannon said something very interesting, because I was a free trade guy. He said something very interesting. The people of this country made this country a really great place to set up your business. They have every right to get a cut of the action when foreigners come and put their businesses here. And it made me think about free trade. How free is it really when labor itself is not as mobile as all the other aspects of economics? So my libertarianism, as yours did, I'm sure, began to be challenged a bit, to the point where right now I find libertarians like Thomas Massey to be completely insufferable and simple. They're simpletons at this point, the way that they spout their
Patrick, I don't know if you know this, but I went to I gave the you wouldn't know this because they shit canned the speech. But I was the keynote speaker last year at the Mises Donor Summit in Hilton Head, and last October, and I went in with and I told them up front. I said, I'm coming in with a challenge. I'm coming in with it's time. I told them. I said, I'm coming in to tell you that it's time to put our big boy pants on.
Yeah.
And then I did so, and I so thoroughly pissed off Tom DiLorenzo and Joe Salerno. They actually took the mic from me that night, and then they refused to publish the speech or even give me a copy of it so I could review it for my own QC purposes. And when I asked politely about that, Tom DiLorenzo wrote me probably the most unprofessional. I know an unprofessional email when I see one, because that's all I ever write. Like I'm a master at writing unprofessional emails, and I can tell you that what Tom DiLorenzo wrote back to me was everything I needed to know. That this organization was not ever going to be ready for prime time when a fourth-rate historian from a third-rate book club tells me that I'm a clown just trying to drum up business for my goat farmers blog. Yes, that's serious. No lie. I have the email. I'm not liable on anybody. He wrote it. I've got it. He can go take a long walk.
You're just a goat here,
or in Tom Luongo speak, he can go fuck himself. Now, so since we're on Rumble, I can actually, okay. So but that being said, right, all I did say was, look, guys, we are in a moment in time when Trump is going to come to power next month, in a couple of months, and we have good ideas, and it's time for us to come in and insert our ideas into what they're trying to do and influence the zeitgeist as they move forward. It's not going to be perfect. You're not even going to consider a lot of it good, but we're here for it. And we should be ready to, take that challenge up. And we understand the plumbing, or at least we think we do. And then I come to find out that we really don't understand the plumbing. That's where we are. So it's it's been a very difficult process. But from a philosophical perspective, nothing's changed. At my core of my being, I still believe that government doesn't have a moral right to tell me to do anything. But at the same time, I also understand the practicality of living in a world where most people don't live that way, don't believe that that's true, or are in a headspace to believe that they can get to that point. So for me, I go back to process. Okay, and the process is I'm going to work like Murray Rothbard always told us, this is where we are today. He voted for Pat Buchanan. Why did he vote for Pat Buchanan? Because he was the best choice amongst a bunch of bad choices, right? Well, it's the same thing. I'm going to advocate for Fed policy in this moment in time that serves the interests of the people that the Fed is supposed to be serving. It doesn't matter philosophically whether the Fed is good, bad, or indifferent.
Yes.
This is, again, I'm not here to bury the Fed. I'm not here to praise the Fed. I'm here to say X. And so what was really interesting was once I started to begin to understand, or begin to not understand, but theorize, hypothesize that maybe the Fed is actually not on board with the whole globalist agenda 2030 bubble, the WEF plan.
Yeah. We buried the lead a little bit there. So one of the things I noticed back years ago, you first pointed out that this Jerome Powell character, and this is very intriguing and something that my audience is a hypothesis my audience is familiar with, that Jerome Powell may not be the evil, monetary controller that we all assume in our Creature from Jekyll Island reading crowd, that he might not be pure evil. He might be up to something. He might be working with Trump. Trump and Powell might be engaged in a kind of kayfabe. Why should that be? And that you stated very well. And so I was hoping you could maybe just kind of give a Reader's Digest version to get everybody started where you're coming from.
Well, that's where I was going to go with this. Okay. So let's start with the beginning. Like when you go back over COVID and you start to really think about COVID as an attack on the U.S. balance sheet and then downstream of that, all the other things that go with it, the summer of violence with BLM and the this and all of those things, like to get Trump out of power. You said something earlier that I'm going to give you a bon mot for. You know a man in politics by who hates him. Mm-hmm. The reason I became enamored of Trump quickly is because the minute he hit the scene, it looked like he was going to get the nomination. They gave him the Ron Paul treatment. Back in 2008, when Ron took down Rudy Giuliani and both sides started going after him, I emailed Lou Rockwell literally that next morning, and I said, tell Ron to get a professional staff together and get ready because he is now in the limelight. So my political instincts then were correct. And then I watched Hillary Clinton and Bill Kristol on MSNBC together, the neocon right, the neocon left, neoliberal left, both screaming about Ron Paul. And like, of course, because they both work for the city of London. Well, and at the time I didn't understand it, the city of London, but I understood that they were two sides of the same coin, right? It's the old Tom Woods adage of, two wings of the same bird of prey and the 3x5 card of acceptable American politics. Tom's not wrong about those arguments, right? I'll give him props for those things. I learned a lot back then, but today we're in a different world. Once we broke through, did you really think that, like, let me just throw some cold water on everybody here. If you think that Ron Paul, had he won the election in 2012, which he would have, by the way, had they not stolen the primaries from him and handed them to Mitt Romney, who was the GOP's chosen loser that year to ensure that Barack Obama was not deposed from power. Had Ron won, do you think Ron would have been able to do anything?
No, not a thing. He would have been crushed like a bug.
He would have been crushed 5 minutes. He would have been crushed between the election and the inauguration.
Yes. And that's what nobody seems to get. It's that they seem to be under the impression, I learned differently, but they seem to be under the impression the president can just go in and work his will. And that is a hilarious joke. The first thing we learned was that the president of the United States can't fire a single damn bureaucrat in any of these agencies because of so-called civil service laws. What?
Right.
That was one of the greatest horrifying shocks to me at the beginning of 2017, which was, wait a minute. You're telling me that they have laws that prevent the president from firing people in the executive branch? Wait,
the president from firing his employees.
Yes.
These people work for him.
What part of unitary executive don't they understand?
Well, obviously, now start talking about the difference between a president under our article. Now start really thinking about who benefits from having put that situation in place, because the American Constitution has always been the kryptonite to the Anglo-Dutch colonial system, as we've come to understand it now.
Okay, what do you mean by that? How is
No, it's really,
what is
it's
the
not,
how
this
is the
isn't,
coin
this
flip
isn't,
between
this
them?
isn't hard. Like, it just
Right.
understand that they have a monarchical system in Europe, right? They have constitutional monarchies, or just these, these constitutionless systems of living document systems. And I know I'll get in trouble with my friend Alexander Mercouris about this. So I'm sorry, but there ain't nothing about the Britain's constitution that is superior to the American system, because
don't even have one.
the American system actually has proper separation of powers until, well,
Wow.
until we got the direct election of senators, which was far worse than the income tax or giving women the right to vote. But
I think Marbury versus Madison.
well, let me not digress too far from there. So the president in the United States has the kind of power that the king used to have. Okay. Why do you think they tried to label their protests this summer "No Kings"? Right. Mm-hmm. And he also has real checks and balances within our system. Our system is designed, Congress legislates, the executive implements, and the judiciary, checks the constitutionality of the law that Congress passes. But the judiciary has almost no power over the president. No power over the president. They have power over the legislature if the legislature passes laws that are that they deem unconstitutional.
But that's
the system. It's a rock, paper, scissors thing.
The 1803 Marbury versus Madison is what established the Supreme Court as the people who got to decide what was constitutional and what was not.
Of course, and Marbury versus Madison needs to be repealed.
Yeah, absolutely. It put us under a judicial dictatorship. Without Marbury versus Madison,
City of London style judicial dictatorship. Absolutely.
Okay.
And there's no argument there. So Marbury versus Madison, one of the worst decisions ever. We can go. So we can just continue the downstream effect of all of this stuff. So at the end of the day, understanding that Trump comes to power in 2017, doesn't even understand the power of the presidency. Spends this whole first term literally learning governmental process because he didn't expect to win, right? So give him a pass on season 1 of the Trump show, because all he could do then was, in a bound down situation, and even then, given all of that, when having almost zero real power, given the extent to which we've been betrayed by the managerial state. In James Burnham sense of that phrase, that has been bound down, where Congress has abdicated, its responsibilities, and the president's delegated its responsibilities to the judiciary. So the whole thing is this very, very London-esque, very, very, European-esque parliamentary system, where the civil servants actually run the country.
Yep.
No different than, Liz Truss was on the other day. I watched an interview with Liz Truss the other day saying, I become prime minister, and then you come to realize that the prime minister has no power. The cabinet secretary has all the power.
Yeah, it's so messed up because
so during Brexit, right after Brexit, when they gave Mark Sedwill both cabinet secretary and head of the civil service, made the same man in charge of both of them. Like, the Brits were screaming at me. My British, audience of that was screaming at me, like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened in the history of our country, because they had to put that guy in charge of the country in order to start the process of stopping Brexit from being implemented after the vote. Brexit is actually what started everything. Trump just, was the down payment on Brexit. Now, where we are today is so then after, so going back to COVID and the attack on the balance sheet / the both culturally, militarily, and financially, our country's balance sheet was under attack all during COVID, right? So now go back to that and understand that what was the point of the CARES Act? What was the point of all of everything that happened during COVID? It was to get the Fed to go back to the zero bound.
Zero what?
Powell had already started raising rates.
To go back to the zero what?
The zero bound on interest rates.
Got it. So
Go back to the zero bound, go back to ZERP, go back to QE and all of that stuff, because we had to, because they killed the bond market. Remember, the bond market blew up before COVID really started to hit. They created a collapse of the U.S. bond market, made it go bidless after the OPEC Plus meeting, where on the first weekend of March, when OPEC said we're not cutting production, and then we woke up, and then we went to bed on Friday night. We closed the markets with oil trading at $85 a barrel, or roughly $85 a barrel on Friday afternoon, and we opened up on Monday at $42 a barrel.
Mm.
I wrote about this. I told everybody, I didn't understand. I fully didn't. But then you take the collateral of the world and you have its price, and all of these and everything, because oil is ultimately the collateral of the world. You destroy price discovery like that in the oil markets, you will have downstream effects on everything. And at that point, everybody's positions in everything, Forex, bonds, stocks, everything at that point are invalid. And so all the interest rate derivatives are blowing up, and the U.S. Treasury market went bidless. And full well, the Federal Reserve, it's a lie, by the way, and it's a pernicious and evil. And I'm going to even go so far as to point my finger at Ron Paul for this, that the Fed comes in to support the friggin' stock market. Maybe under Greenspan that was the case. It has not been the case under Bernanke. It has not been the case under Yellen, and it certainly has not been the case under Jerome Powell. What the Fed will always come in to defend is the U.S. Treasury market.
Okay.
Because
So
without the U.S. Treasury market, there is no ability for the Fed to be a central bank.
When the Fed comes in and cuts interest rates, is what you're saying, to support the Treasury.
And yes, in order to get the banking system, the plumbing of the banking system moving, when the Treasury market goes bidless, because the repo markets have seized and the tri-party repo markets have seized, and the Fed has to go to the zero bound and throw unlimited liquidity into the system. It has nothing to do with the stock market. That is a lie. It is a bad lie, and it's sloppy analysis by gold bugs, Bitcoiners, and everybody else. All of these people are my peers. Some of them are my friends, and it drives me up a freaking wall.
Okay.
Because the analysis is correct. Because at the end of the day, never forget anything. You may disagree with Socrates. You may think that Martin Armstrong does not have a magic AI that can predict the future. But I can tell you one thing. Marty's always right about what's going on behind the scenes.
Okay.
Because I'm sorry, he is, because he's in the room with all these people.
Marty.
I've met Marty, and I've broken bread with Marty, and I've looked him in the eye. I can tell you flat out, after years of learning from Marty and dancing around him. Now that I know him personally, I know. I can tell you, he's never wrong. Like the amalgam of so many things that I've learned over the years. I learned some stuff from Jeff Snyder about the Eurodollar markets. I learned a lot from Martin Armstrong about capital flows. I learned a lot from the Lou Rockwell crowd and the Mises Institute about credit creation and the nature of money and all of this stuff. I learned a lot from some of the gold guys, yada, yada, yada. You take all of that and you synthesize it into that moment when Jerome Powell goes to the Green Seas Summit in early June 2024, and Christine Lagarde starts her big central banker campaign to coordinate monetary policy to make the world safe from climate change. And Jerome Powell stands up like the guy in Monty Python's The Life of Brian and goes, "I'm not." And he literally said, "I'm sorry, but my role as Federal Reserve Chair is to support the congressional dual mandate of stable prices and full employment, not climate change." And literally Lagarde looked at him and she was angry, and she got really, really mad. Go back and watch this.
I didn't watch it the first time.
I remember when this happened, right? And I was reading Zero Hedge at the time, and it was my daily haunt, and I was writing 5-6 articles a week, and they were all going up on Zero Hedge. And for the market report, my patron market report that week, because all this other stuff happened that week too. Major things were happening that week. And I popped up and I went and I saw Powell say that. and I stopped everybody dead calling this. This is the most important article in the world this week. And I was right. I didn't know why I was right, interestingly enough, but I knew I was right.
Okay.
I didn't agree. At that point, I'm still Powell's a printer go burr guy, all that stuff. I'm still that guy. Then Powell comes in 2.5 weeks later, 17 days later at the FOMC meeting and raises the reverse repo payout rate 5 basis points above the Fed funds rate.
Mm-hmm.
And
what date is this roughly?
This is whatever the Fed meeting is. I think it was like June 19th, June 20th or whatever. It's
of what year?
Fed meeting. So
year?
At the Fed meeting in June of 2021.
Okay, 2021. Thank you.
2021. Powell raises the reverse repo payout rate 5 basis points above the Fed funds rate. Now, at that point, the 30-day T-bill rate was starting to trade underneath the Fed funds rate. And so he had to defend the zero bound. He was still at the zero bound. So he had to defend that. And so the way he did that was to create a positive rate, rate play for the banks to park their excess liquidity at the Federal Reserve. Park their excess liquidity. So the repo is, you have dollars and you need collateral, right? As opposed to a normal repo. The normal repo is you have dollars and you need collateral. And in a reverse repo, you have collateral, treasuries, and you need dollars, right? And so when he did that, what he did was he allowed a whole bunch of collateral to be parked into the Fed, into the reverse repo facility, which had already ballooned up to about $450 billion in the balance. By raising it by 5 basis points, which I call the 5 basis points that changed the world, by Jackson Hole that year, it was $2.5 trillion. Now, when he did that, and I remember reading the zero hedge, postmortem on the FOMC meeting, and they said a nothing burger FOMC report. Powell didn't change interest rates, this and everything else. Here are the red lines. Here's the change to the official statement. And they raised this one little technical interest rate, 5 basis points.
Which is very
small.
But
I noted, because I learned from Martin Armstrong that the euro cannot stand up to the dollar, that the euro collapsed in 48 hours from $1.22 to $1.19. And I went, massive reversal on the weekly, monthly, and quarterly chart. It turns out to, by the end of that quarter, massive reversal signal, bearish reversal signal in the euro. And then it all starts to hit me like a wave. Like, whoa, why is Powell draining liquidity from the global markets?
Okay.
If it's printer go burr season, ask yourself if Powell's just another inflationista, why is he draining the markets at the moment when Christine Lagarde is telling all the other G7 nations it's time to print to the high heavens to combat climate change? And then I go back and I start thinking about what Marty kept saying about Marty and others were saying about what the plan of the WEF was, which is that they wanted to introduce central bank digital currencies. Now, what's the real worry about the central bank digital currency?
They'll be able to, the big scare.
It's not the programmability. It is, but it's not. The first problem is that we have a two-channel monetary system. From the Fed to the commercial banks, from the commercial banks to the consumers.
Okay.
If you marry the consumer directly to the central bank, who gets squeezed out?
Commercial banks.
Who's the most powerful political lobby in the United States?
I'm going to guess commercial
banks.
Okay.
You think JP Morgan and Bank of America and Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan just built a $3.5 billion building, as my friend V over at Rogue News pointed out to me the other day, the gorilla economist pointed out to me the other day. It's the largest, tallest building in the United States now. Is a new JP Morgan headquarters on 6th Avenue.
So the central bank digital currencies.
So you're going to tell me that JP Morgan is going to be down with the WEF and the globalists getting rid of the American
Well, let's back up
American
for
commercial
one
banking
second.
system.
I got to ask a
No
question.
freaking way.
I've thought of the commercial banks as being controlled by the central banks, and they're just one big happy family. Is that completely untrue? And how does
No,
that
the
relationship
other way
work?
around. The Fed
Okay.
works for the Fed is owned by the New York Fed is owned by the New York banks. Who are the
commercial banks?
primary? I just sat down and I went, okay, let's go through this. The central bank digital currency would cut out the commercial banks. Why would the Fed be now? Why would they do this? Well, the Fed. Okay. The Fed obviously doesn't want to make the world safe for climate change. Okay, fine, because Powell just stated it. Now, why is the Fed draining $2 trillion from global M0, from the Eurodollar markets? Because that's why the euro crashed. That's why the pound crashed. Okay.
Why?
Why would they do that? So now I ask, so then put another piece of the puzzle together. Oh, because the goal here is to introduce central bank digital currencies and destroy national sovereignty, hand everything over to the UN. You will own nothing and be happy. You will rent your life back from City of London and Brussels and Zurich and Singapore at pennies on the dollar, and pennies on your hours, and cut the U.S. commercial banks out in the process. They've already destroyed the British commercial banks. They were already effectively nationalized during the 2008 financial crisis. Dodd-Frank has made credit creation for the lower and middle classes in the United States
Impossible.
Almost impossible.
Yeah.
They nationalized, they stole Fannie and Freddie from the people, right? Right. Okay. So now think about all that stuff. I didn't even know the Fannie and Freddie stuff. I had lost all. I didn't understand any of it when it happened in 2008. So
neither did I.
Right. No one did. Right. Well, a few did. So now start really thinking. So why would Wall Street, the major U.S. money center banks, why would they allow this globalist takeover of our system? Because there's no seat at the table for them. They're not the central banks. They are the intermediaries. Commercial banking built America.
The 30, yeah. I remember you talking about the 30-year mortgage as an instrument.
Well, that comes later, but I'm now just thinking about, after Andrew Jackson gets rid of the second bank of the United States in the 1830s, and we move all the way up through until, Woodrow Wilson destroys the Constitution, okay, for the British in 1913. That's what built America. We've been living off that capital, that seed corn, for 110 years. That's how much capital we built.
And Donald Trump has made direct reference to that himself. He said, when we were really rich, when we were running ourselves on tariffs, and then 1913, after that, all hell breaks loose.
So this is my thought process back then. And I'm like, okay, so the commercial banks would not go along with that. And then I asked the very basic question to myself, who owns the Fed? Well, the New York Fed is owned by all the Wall Street money center banks. What's the most powerful of the 12 regional Fed banks? New York. And I'm doing live streams back then, and I got a text from a guy, friend of mine now a good friend of mine. He says, "You really want to look into this whole thing with SOFR?" And then he starts explaining it to me in his banker inside baseball kind of way. And I went, hold on for a second. I'm going to summarize, and I'm doing it in text on my phone while smoking a cigar on my back porch. I'm going to summarize what you just wrote. Tell me if I'm wrong or not. And I did. And he's like, you're correct. I'm like, so he's the one. I always credit him for this because he's a good guy and he deserves the credit for it. I'm not going to tell, until I actually put him in public, right? I'm not going to, say, I'm not going to out him until he's willing to, be in public on this one. But that being said, he said, yeah, you're correct. Okay. So what was the story here? So understand that, okay, now I have all the incentives lining up. We have American money center banks refusing to allow the Federal Reserve to implement a central bank digital currency to save the world from climate change in order for the globalists under Tony Blair, Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, and all the rest of them run the table on us and make us all digital serfs. And in their 15-minute arcologies, wearing masks in our cars, which we're not even allowed to drive anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I'm on that. Within a week, I'm like, now he goes, okay, let's talk about SOFR. I'm like, what the fuck is SOFR? How do we price dollars previous to 2017? We price SOFR. We price dollars globally by LIBOR.
Okay. Can you explain this like we're five? There's thank you so much.
Okay. This is going to take the rest of the podcast, by the way. So
it's worth it, in my opinion.
Okay. That's fine. I just, I want to make sure that we know what we're dealing with. So what is LIBOR? LIBOR is the London Interbank Offer Rate. After World War II, when we start the Marshall Plan, we start sending dollars out and using our massive industrial capacity to rebuild the world after World War II, right? We send all these dollars out, and they get parked in banks around the world. The euro dollar system is now, really what's pricing dollars worldwide. And those euro dollars are just dollars sitting in foreign bank accounts ready to, rebuild, hospitals and bridges and all the stuff that was bombed during World War II. Eventually, that system becomes those dollars become the engine of global growth. We're sending dollars out. We're getting untariffed consumer goods coming back in. All these other countries have protection tariffs against us during this time in order to protect their competitiveness against us while we're bringing them out of, effectively the Stone Age. Like we're bringing Germany and France and everybody back out of the Stone Age. I'm not even going to get into Bretton Woods and pegging the dollar to gold to the pre-war rate, which was a mistake, just same mistake that I'm not even going to go there. This gets even more complicated once you start tracing the monetary history and how we did at Bretton Woods made the exact same mistake that Winston Churchill made after World War I, which created modern Germany, which has then created the Eurodollar system and kept the City of London in charge of everybody's freaking dollars. But that being said, the Eurodollar system at that point becomes the mechanism by which global dollars are priced, because they start to dwarf the size of the domestic dollar markets. So by the late 1960s, really the first LIBOR trade is credited with actually the year I was born, 1968. A lot of things happened in 1968, by the way, including the fall of the London Gold.
I want to make sure everybody's keeping up here. LIBOR is a method by which dollars are priced worldwide. All right.
But not at this point. At this point, it's just an amorphous lending situation out there. There's just dollars sitting in accounts and doing things, and then some people are making money and they're building up dollars in their accounts, and then they want to put them to work, and they don't know what to do with them. They could buy stocks with them, but stocks are kind of shit. And gold's pegged and blah 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 blah. Now, some people were buying gold, i.e. the French, and that's what caused the collapse of the London gold pool, and the end of Bretton Woods was in 1968. And as Murray Rothbard rightly pointed out, we had like three monetary systems between 1968 and 1971 when Nixon quote unquote closed the gold window. Again, lots of other things that go into that now, and I have a lot of different ways of looking at that. I have a different view on that history now that I understand all of this. But LIBOR doesn't become LIBOR, right? And for a long time, but it's all during the 70s. This system of the private lending, and there's a quote system and an unofficial market beginning to happen over the course of 14 years or 16 years actually, in 1984, when LIBOR is officially adopted as the debt indexing rate of the dollar worldwide. Everybody's using LIBOR at that point. It's just a system. Eventually, over the course of time, all the liquidity is flowing through London. All of these dollars are flowing out of out of the United States into London, into Europe, and around the world, right? Because London is ultimately the place where all the foreign exchange is being done, right? So at the end of the day, they're the guys making all these deals and pricing dollars on a day-to-day basis. So the LIBOR panel is 18 City of London banks. Well, 17 City of London banks and one American bank, the London office, the London subsidiary of JP Morgan. Now, I don't know. At the time, was it that? I don't know. I mean, it could have been whoever JP Morgan Chase was. I mean, you know, remember, there's been so much bank consolidation. I don't remember who it was back then. But as of today, when LIBOR is now no longer, in the last days of LIBOR, it was 17 City of London banks plus JP Morgan's London office.
Okay.
Now, a lot of things about City of London that, you know, that make its markets fundamentally different than our markets. The regulations are completely different. Let's not even go into any of that stuff, but understand that that's where LIBOR started and was created. LIBOR is nothing more than the old London gold fix. When markets were unsophisticated and we didn't have, you know, global telecommunications, and at best we were calling each other either by telex or, you know, or the telephone or whatever. Like at the end of the day, when we woke up in the morning, we needed to know what the price of gold was, so that people can go into a gold shop and buy a coin and know what the fix was for the day, right? And that people can make a market in this stuff. Same thing in dollars. We had to create a global dollar market. You know, and so the 18 City of London banks would get together at the end of the previous trading day and go, what are we pricing dollars at tomorrow? Well, what did you sell them for today? Mm-hmm. And then they'd come up with an average rate nominally in someone's best interest. But nominally it's supposed to be ours. But
yeah, and it's
and then the next morning they'd quote the LIBOR rate. It would trade, you know, and then as markets became more sophisticated, more global, and more computerized, and now we can get to the point where we can trade them 24/7 around the world. Then we just make a market in LIBOR as futures, and you know, and all of this stuff, and then it just becomes a thing. And the LIBOR fix every day isn't as necessary as it used to be, but LIBOR was still the way we price dollars. Now, here's the important part to understand why this is so pernicious. Who's in control of the value and the price of dollars? Is it the Federal Reserve?
No.
It's 18 City of London banks.
Or 17 City of London banks, and then
JP Morgan's London office. But at that point, JP Morgan might as well have been a London.
Exactly.
Bank.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, that's who's actually pricing dollars. Why? Because, and what are they looking at? They're looking at the global price of dollars, not the global price of so now let's start talking about operational efficiency, economic advantage, and everything else. Once you understand that, now what I'm about to say will make so much more sense to you. Now, let's not beat around the bush. Who up until recently, not today, but let's go back to 1985, 1990, 1995. Who's got the most efficient economy in the world?
United States.
Labor usage rates, you know, by any metric, of course, the United States. So now, if you're any stripe of economist worth his shit, you would understand that the United States, because it's more efficient in capital allocation, has a higher can support a higher cost of dollars and still be profitable than a less efficient. Everybody's using the same currency, effectively. So can Germany, that's being rebuilt, use dollars more efficiently than the United States? No,
of course not.
So when the Fed is doing its job of monitoring what's happening domestically in the United States, right? And it goes, oh, we're raising, well, the Fed funds rate is blah, the prime rate's blah, yada, yada, yada. Okay. But now the economy's starting to overheat. We need to raise interest rates and cut that back. All right. I'm again, it doesn't matter whether you like Keynesianism or you don't like Keynesianism. This is just the way interest rates work. And I don't give a shit if you're Bob Murphy who has done great work on interest rate, you know, on Austrian interest rate theory. I learned all my shit about interest rates from Bob. He's right. He's, for the most part, he's right. I like his attitude towards it. It's fine. It doesn't matter if you're an Austrian or you're Keynesian or anything else. It's the cost of it doesn't matter whether you like the Fed controlling the rate or not. The Fed is his job is to manage the cost of capital to keep the economy from exacerbating booms and busts.
Mhm.
That's its job. I didn't say it actually achieves that goal, but here's why it never achieved that goal under the LIBOR standard. Because here's the thing. All of our debt in the United States is indexed to LIBOR. Your interest rate derivatives, your credit revolvers at your company, your credit cards, your car loans, your mortgages, everything is tied to LIBOR. Right? So, now, Fed needs to start capping interest rates because they're raising interest rates because they're too high, because they're too low, and the economy is overheating. The United States can handle, let's just for sake of argument, can handle 6% cost of capital, but Europe can only handle 2% or 2.5% or 3%. So what happens when the Fed goes above 3%? Well, it's going to cause a recession and/or a depression
in Europe,
in Germany, in the UK, and all of a sudden, all these people who are short dollars because they've loaned in dollars at these low rates. Now those loans are going bad as nobody can pay the freaking loans back because it's too hard to get dollars. So what happens to LIBOR? The cost of they're selling dollars for more than 3%. They're selling dollars for 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10%. What happens as that starts to blow up and the spread between LIBOR and the Fed funds rate starts to creep away from each other? All the new debt in the United States, or all the daily, now repos are that amount of money. Now all the plumbing in the United States starts to slow down. Now credit creation in the United States starts to slow down faster than we're actually working off the malinvestment of the previous business cycle because interest rates were too low. To give props to the Austrians and the basic Austrian business cycle theories. Right. Apply that and then watch the plumbing, and you'll see how these freaking people were running an operation on us the entire time. So what happens? LIBOR starts to blow out. American cost of capital starts to reflect the needs of cost of capital overseas, and our interest rates, practical everyday interest rates that we actually as consumers and buyers of credit have to interface with. That means your variable rate mortgage blows out to based on LIBOR, what LIBOR is doing, not what our economy can actually handle. Okay, so you have to understand this: the practical interest rate and the theoretical ability to deal with capital. We're getting an artificial slowdown here in the U.S. And then the Austrians, to their credit, but ideologically possessed because they'd never made this fucking point. And this is what pisses me off. You never made the goddamn point that someone else was running our monetary policy. And then you just would reflexively blame the Fed because you want to get back to 100% reserve banking and hard money. But that's an incomplete analysis. And then that turns out to just be more basic, everyday, second grade political posturing, to your point about Thomas Massey at the beginning of
virtue signaling.
Podcast.
Yeah.
You're virtue signaling when not actually doing the work. So the fact that when I explained all this multiple times, when I was on Tom Wood's show or I was on with Bob Murphy or any of this stuff, they were like, this is all news to them. I'm like, right, because you've been stuck in your own ideological framework and you never actually interface with the rest of the goddamn world. Like, go out of academia. Bob is a good guy because he's actually advising people with real money. I remember when I had him on the podcast and we talked about this stuff, and I'm like, and I was scared to death to talk to him because I didn't know where we were going to wind up being. I didn't know if it was going to get contentious or whatever, right? But no, it turns out Bob's a very reasonable guy, and he's a great and had a bunch of lovely talks about this stuff. And his mind was like, oh, that makes sense to me, because he's like, I can see that because now I'm managing real money in the real world. Bingo. Yeah. So. And anybody who's not sure about that, go listen to the podcast we did in Gold, Goats, and Guns, or go listen to the Human Action podcast a couple of times that I was on, and you'll see the conversations were more than cordial. So, the point here is that effectively, The Fed starts to raise interest rates. LIBOR blows out more than the Fed raises interest rates. The Fed's raising interest rates to get rid of the malinvestment from the previous cycle, which says, well, let's say we were at 2% and we need to go to 6 to wipe it all out. But the Fed only gets to 4.5, and then has to go back, and then has to go back to 1 because LIBOR starts to blow out to 7 or 9, which creates a slowdown in the American economy that forces the Fed to cut the rate cycle short every time. And of course, who's trading against that in the Treasury market and accumulating our debt at stink bid and then playing the bond market? Why do you think Bill Gross was the bond king for 40 years? And the minute that that SOFR comes into effect, he can't even figure out how to trade bonds anymore.
Well, we got to say what SOFR is. So SOFR is a replacement for LIBOR.
Right.
And it is controlled by someone who is not 17 London banks plus JP Morgan.
Right. SOFR is the brainchild of John Williams, who is the head of the all-powerful New York Fed. It was sitting there as a white paper at the Fed all during the Geithner years, all during the Yellen years, all during it. They never did a thing with it until Jerome Powell was brought into the Fed in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And then first thing, Powell as FOMC chair, and the wailing and gnashing of teeth in the financial press. You can go back and look at this stuff. It's there. The Financial Times, Barron's, all of them, all the gatekeepers were all screaming that John Williams was not qualified to go from the Atlanta Fed to the all-powerful New York Fed, because they knew what was going to happen. John Williams was going to start the process of implementing SOFR. And
this was just something that the Fed could do. And the Fed had the power to do this on its own.
Mm-hmm.
All this time, they could use a
have done something. They could have created that. Yeah, they could have created something like SOFR all during the 70s, all during the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
all during the 90s, all during the aughts, and they never did it. Why?
Because we were
a nation owned and operated by British globalists. That's why it's in our CIA. The CIA is just the OSS rebranded. They're all in our State Department. They're all here. They're all in our media. They're all everywhere. They're
everything
everywhere.
So
the Jews don't run America. The Brits do.
Well, I mean, the Brits, they're over there. The City of London. We're going to argue a million days. Are they really British? Are they Brits? Are they English?
Who cares? It doesn't matter. It doesn't freaking matter. As I've said many times, Patrick, being a shitbag is not an ethnicity.
Yes, I agree. All right. Now,
so understand, that once we implement SOFR, we go back to SOFR. So what is SOFR? SOFR is a debt indexing rate based on actual data within the American repo markets. Right? It's a market rate. It's not decided upon by a bunch of guys on a phone call, on a Zoom call at the end of the freaking day. It is it's what the Fed is pricing money at and what the banks are pricing money at relative to the Fed funds rate. Mm-hmm. And the Fed knows whether or not it has to raise or lower interest rates based on the actual stress within our markets, not foreign markets. Mm-hmm. Now the Fed is working. Now the Fed's monetary policy can be directly in concert with American economic activity, as opposed to having to serve two masters.
Yes. So for anybody who thinks,
and this is why when Powell started to raise interest rates, I understood this in 2021. I watched them try to force the Fed to not get off the zero bound during the early days of the Biden junta. It failed. Build Back Better, the infrastructure bill, all of that stuff was designed to force so much spending on the table that the Fed would never be able to do anything other than monetize it all. It was blackmail. Because the CBO report finally came out at one point as $6.5 trillion in the first 3 years of Build Back Better was going to cost. So they were going to have to force the Fed to monetize another $6.5 trillion worth of debt. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So watching all this, and they fought Powell's reconfirmation because they knew he was going to raise interest rates the minute he got confirmed for a second term. They knew it was coming because SOFR was getting fully implemented to so no new debt contracts in the United States could be written against LIBOR as of January 1, 2022. So all this was coming to a head in 2021, which is why we had to get rid of Trump, which is why we had why they did all of this shit in 2020 in COVID, why COVID had to happen in 2020. Couldn't happen in 2021. Trump would have been reelected by then, right?
Yeah.
So
I felt like COVID was there to make it so that they could cheat in the election and get Trump out.
Yeah.
And
So
a whole bunch of other things.
But it was always about the Federal Reserve.
And it was always
Because
about
with Powell in control of the Fed, with John Williams at the New York Fed, and SOFR being implemented, now the United States had financial control over its future. Now it had financial independence. Now what it needs is political independence. It doesn't have political independence because we've got a bunch of traitors in Congress,
literal
two of whom are Rand Paul and Thomas Massie.
Yep. And that's such a hard thing for this crowd to accept. Now, not my audience. Vast majority of them are on board. They're like, oh, wow, Rand, you're just, you mean we can't blow up speedboats charging at our border in the Gulf of Mexico? We can't just blow them up. We have to what? We have to read them their rights. Are you insane?
Wait, are you out of your mind?
Yeah.
Yeah, no. How about piracy on the heights? How about letters of marque? You want me to use a letter of marque and reprisal just to make it constitutional? I will.
Yeah. So it's breathtaking. This is Ron Paul's son.
I know.
I don't know if those guys have been a psyop this whole damn time. I don't even know. Have they been controlled opposition just to keep us dumb and supplicate and
I don't know.
I don't know.
It's a good question, man. It's a good question. It really is. And but just to make sure we close the loop, right? Yeah. SOFR gives the Fed control over its own monetary policy for the first time since the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeff Snyder taught me that when he was working for Alhambra Partners, that the Fed wasn't in control. But I also watched Jeff crash out the minute SOFR started to get implemented, and he said, quote, and I will never forget this. He's either in a blog post or in an interview or whatever. And he said, but the Eurodollar system is the free market response to the Fed's tyranny. And I went,
libertarian.
No, it was never a free market and money in the first place. Are you kidding me?
Dude,
I was like, I'm like putting them on the list of, I'm putting them on the list of operatives at that point. I don't know if he is or isn't. It's stupid. I just don't care. And then right after that, he got fired from Alhambra Partners.
From what?
He was the blogger for Alhambra Partners at that point. The financial blogger for Alhambra Partners, and it was Joe Calhoun over at Alhambra Partners. And I remember reading Jeff for years, and I could never understand anything he was talking about because he was writing in freaking guild speak, which is always a dead giveaway that when a guy doesn't write or try to communicate clearly, and he's using way too much jargon, and as much jargon as I've used here, folks, I've actually tried to spice it up with invective so that you understand what's going on, right? I'm not trying to be a gatekeeper here. I'm literally trying to explain it in as simple a term as possible. Whereas Jeff it was incomprehensible. I would look at these charts and I don't understand what he's talking about. And I'm like, oh yeah. Mortal words of Danielle DiMartino Booth when she was meeting in her book Fed Up, when she met Zoltan Pozar for the first time. She's like, there are two types of communicators in the world. There are teachers and there are gatekeepers. Mm-hmm. Teachers try to figure out how the simplest way imaginable to explain something to you, and gatekeepers try to make it as complicated as possible so that they can protect their bailiwick.
Oh yeah,
and be the only expert in the room. And if you look at the way Jeff Snyder has portrayed himself since leaving Alhambra Partners and starting Eurodollar University, he's done everything imaginable to be that guy
on purpose. And
then for 2 years, I was actually challenging that and was respectfully challenging. I'm like, no, I still think Jeff's right about this. And yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay. No, you're just a gatekeeper.
Mm-hmm. If I could distill the LIBOR versus SOFR argument, though, if I were to distill it down into, say, 30 seconds, it would be there was LIBOR, which was a foreign oligarchy deciding how to price dollars.
Mm-hmm.
SOFR, a market-based metric for pricing dollars that is objective and transparent, and
in the domestic markets, and that they have to take their cues from our markets, because our monetary policy is going to be set by what SOFR does, not what the rest of the world does, what the rest of the world wants. If the rest of the world wants 1% dollars, that's nice. They can figure out how to print them on their own, and they can go do that. But they're not going to get dollars at 1% from us.
Yes.
Today, where we sit as we end this podcast, is now that SOFR has replaced the Eurodollar futures. Remember, Eurodollar futures, this was a Jeff Snyder thing all during 2022 and 2023. SOFR doesn't matter. The Eurodollar futures market is where all the volume is. I'm like, yeah, until all the American banks get on board and can only trade SOFR because they can't trade Eurodollar futures anymore. And then within a year and a half, all that volume had shifted from one contract to the other. And within a year and a half, the COMEX ended the Eurodollar futures product.
Okay.
And then LIBOR has finally ended for all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
Like
as of June 30th, 2023 is when.
The last 3-month LIBOR contract ended. Synthetic LIBOR. They extended it for another like 6 or 9 months. The last synthetic LIBOR contract ended on March 31st, 2025. And when was Trump's tariff liberation day announcement?
March,
the very next trading day.
Yeah.
The very next trading day, April 2nd.
That is so.
That was the biggest. Was the biggest like to London ever.
Yeah.
And London ran a massive operation in concert with Mark Carney at the Bank of Canada on the entire SOFR futures market.
Yeah.
During that week, that's what I call the tariff tantrum. Okay.
It was beautiful.
And you could see it happening. And every time they try to attack they've tried this now twice. Every time they try to attack the markets, the American markets, they start the process by saying the basis trade is going to blow up. Now, for those of you who don't know what the basis trade is, that's simply just trading spot versus future treasuries and then picking up the spread. It's no different than trading spot versus future gold, knowing full well that next month gold is going to trade at like $20 an ounce or $15 an ounce higher than today's gold. So you go long, you go long one and short the other, and you pick up a little bit of money on a couple of basis points in the bond markets, a couple of basis points and interest along the way. It's supposed to be a free trade. As long as the markets stay in contango, then you're good. If the markets go into backwardation, you get stopped out, and then you have to reverse the trade. But the basis trade was blamed for the tariff tantrum back in April when they were attacking the SOFR markets. Go back and look at the historical data on SOFR futures contracts, the 3-month SOFR futures contracts, and you'll see hourly bars. I'm not kidding. Hourly bars that were moving 15, 16 basis points. This is on a market that shouldn't move more than 2 to 3 basis points a day.
Yeah. Crazy volatility.
Interesting. Also, last point on all that. I just noted this the other day for my patrons. I chart the SOFR futures curve all the time. Like, so I'll take a snapshot of it like all the time, and then every once in a while, once a quarter, I'll bin the data up and put it aside so that I can look at the history of how badly the market. This is my way of saying, oh, look, if you think that if anybody's out there telling you that the SOFR futures curve is, or this curve, or the Fed funds futures curve or whatever that's the holy gospel, the market knows what's going on and you're wrong and blah blah blah. I'm like, really? This is what it looked like a year ago. This is what it looked like 9 months ago. This is what it looked like 6 months ago. This is where it is today, and none of those 4 curves make any sense whatsoever. This is how we were pricing money at these these futures points in time, and none of it makes any sense. Interestingly enough, and that's been that way for the last 3 years. Since the tariff tantrum in April, the SOFR futures market has been accurately predicting where we're going to be in the future. Meaning, I've got the SOFR futures curve of everything of out 3 years from like around D-Day, around June, early June. If you look at that curve today, and you look at that curve then, and the curve today, they're exactly the same within a basis point.
What does this mean for Americans? What's Trump's
What it means for
endgame?
Americans is that we finally can price our own dollars, and that we have a Federal Reserve that's working for us, as opposed to working for the globalists.
Yes.
Is what it means. It means that we have a commercial banking system that can now accurately price debt, so that you will get, for very small values of the best rate on your money that you can get, because we have a market-driven rate that for all of this. So that's what's really going on here. And you cannot have political independence and military independence without financial independence. So my original thesis, hypothesis back in June of 2021 was that Wall Street was backing the Fed's play here, because they were making a play against the global banks, against the globalists in London and Frankfurt and Zurich and the rest of them, and Paris. They were making a play to finally declare financial independence from their markets, and we're leaving them in the dust, while they were doing everything imaginable to destroy us politically. And what I found really, really disheartening is to watch libertarians crash out, because they're so in the mode of evil American empire is trying to take over the world, still trying to defend the world, defend their empire. I'm like, no, that's not what we're doing. We're actually trying to extricate ourselves from the old Anglo-Dutch system of debt and currency arbitrage, which destroys labor and destroys the value of labor and turns everybody into serfs. That's what's coming. That's what we're dealing with. And I think the Promethean Action ladies are correct about what's going on. It's the British who kill our presidents. I just spoke to Richard Poe the other day, and I haven't published the podcast yet, but he's got a new book coming out going, Who Killed Lincoln? The Case for Britain.
Yeah.
Right? It's the same argument. And anybody who spends 5 minutes like looking into John Wilkes Booth, you realize that, he was a London asset. So with all of that said, folks, it gets the world is getting really complicated as all these old relationships break down.
Yes.
Right. And it's hard to understand where all the moves are going to go and come next, but I'm going to give you the TLDR.
Okay.
If you're not sure what's happening, it's probably because London is trying to make it as complicated as possible. When you see a needless complication in anything, assume it's London. When you look at what Donald Trump has done in his first 9 months, whether you think he should have arrested all these stupid middle managers like Hillary Clinton and all the rest of them, understand he achieved, and he's right when he says this. I've been at 8 wars. All of those wars that he's ended were all meant to be permanent conflict zones. And guess who's on both sides of the conflict?
The globalist bankers.
It's always Britain. It's always the Brits. I don't care if you're talking Nagorno-Karabakh, so that Armenia and Azerbaijan are at war with each other, or we're talking Sudan and South Sudan, or Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, whatever. All of those wars, Cambodia, Thailand, the French are on one side, the British are on the other, and they're having tea and wine, watching the ants, attack each other.
Yeah,
it's always the same thing. India, Pakistan, India, China, Canada, the United States. Never forget, Canada was always Matt Ehret. Patrick, if you could talk to anybody about any of this, you should talk to my friend Matt Ehret. We'll give you all the receipts about how Canada was always a British project to sabotage the United States. Always. Canada should have always been, the United States should have always owned all of this.
Yeah.
All the way to the Arctic Circle.
And that's another thing that's coming soon with Donald Trump talking about Greenland and the
Panama Canal, and everybody's like, "What is he talking about all this stuff for?"
Yeah.
Oh, it's
shipping lanes.
And And Trump is also ahead of the curve on that too. I'm going to have to run this. I think we said an hour and 15.
We
Happy
are
to do this again another day.
absolutely. Tom, thank you so much. Yeah, Tom, thank you so much for joining. I look forward to having you back again. TomLuongo.me, the Gold Goats and Guns podcast.
Gold Goats and Guns.
Thank you so much for joining, and we will see you all next time. Bye.
Thank you.